All right, welcome to Cover Crops and Mulches on the Hand Scale Farm. My name is Jen Salinetti.
And I'm Mathieu Boudreau.
I am co-owner and co-founder of Woven Roots Farm and Education Center.
And I am the farm crew manager at Woven Roots Farm. And previous to that, I studied at Drew University, studying environmental studies and sustainability, focusing on food policy, food-related subjects.
I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about Woven Roots Farm as an intro. And hi, welcome. Before we do that, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we stand today. We are standing on Algonquin land, specifically the Nipmuc people. And so I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that this is stolen land that we are all on, and that this is something that we should continue to keep in our consciousness. Woven Roots Farm itself actually stands on the Stockbridge-Munsee band land, which is part of the Mohican Nation, and it is something that we are incredibly honored to be able to do, and the indigenous wisdom that we draw upon on a daily basis is something that really leads us in our life and in our practices, which we will be speaking more to today. So, do we need more chairs? There's some seating up here if you'd like. If you're comfortable, there's a couple more seats. Good? Okay. So as I said, we are a vegetable farm. We're also a CSA and an education center. We are located in Tyringham, Mass, in the Berkshires, the western part of the state, not far from Albany. Is anyone familiar with the Berkshires? Awesome. We are located here in Tyringham. We've been here actually we bought this land 8.5 years ago. We started farming on rented land in the neighboring town, and we started farming 20 years ago there. It was a collective process between my husband and I, so we are entering our 20th year into farming, and of those 20 years, 15 years we have been actively farming full-time. The practices that we're going to be speaking to today, some of them are newer, some of them we have been practicing for the lifelong of our farm, and we're always stepping into creative spaces and finding ways to better our systems, and so we're excited to be sharing what we've been learning over the last 5 years in particular. So our farm is based on our initial idea of really wanting to provide quality vegetables to our community. We started out just as a backyard garden, market garden space that we opened up a farm stand, and because we realized we had more than we needed for our own family. And then we realized in that process that by engaging and growing food for our community, we really needed to make sure that on all levels we were taking care of each other. So we have made it a priority to focus on farm fertility and a cooperative model of farming throughout all of the years that we have been farming full-time. And it's a constant reciprocal relationship that we're having with ourselves, with the land, and with the people that we feed. So I thought it would be helpful for us to actually just think a little bit more about the word regenerative, and to help guide us on our thought process throughout our time together. When I did a search for the word, there were a few different definitions that came up, so maybe you could share them?
Possesses the cause, something to heal or become active again after it has been damaged or inactive. Practices that increases biodiversity, enriches soils, improves watersheds, and enhances ecosystem services. The act of improving a place or system so that it is active or producing good results again.
So do those resonate with everyone? Does it make sense? I think when I look at these, I would actually think of our farm being a little bit more centered on the practices that increase biodiversity, enriches soils, improve watersheds, and enhances ecosystems. Again, going back to that space of reciprocity. And so we are going to be looking through this lens our entire time together. So to start as a foundation, I thought it'd be helpful to really just emphasize what our guiding principles are. And we will spend the most time on our final guiding principle, which is keeping the soil covered as much as possible. So the first one is to work in relationship with the soil. And these two photographs I chose to put next to each other so that I am constantly reminded of what it looked like before we started working in relationship with soil. So the picture that you see here on the left shows an area of our farm that was completely devastated by a heavy rainfall. And this was something that we would regularly see. This is when we were plowing our fields and not tending to them in a no-till by hand method. And so a heavy rain would come in and it would wash away the most beneficial topsoil. Clearly there was lack of aeration and drainage that was happening in this space. We wouldn't have access to our fields. Things would have to shut down or pause, which would then cause areas to go to much greater weeds. And we were in a place where we weren't sure if and how we were going to be able to continue farming if we were to continue practices like this. Our first child was our inspiration to really get into systems that were logical for us and were enabling us to be able to work off of a small piece of land. So we have 10 acres total now that our farm sits on, and of that land, there's 1.5 acres that is actually garden space. And so from that garden space area, because of the practices that we have instilled over the years, we are now able to yield an average of $100,000 per acre. This example here shows a permanent bed system that it's a little bit dark. We'll have closer pictures, but there's some initial mulching that is here in the beds. And you can see this is a heavy rainfall. This rainfall here on the left was about 4 inches of rain over a course of 24 hours. This picture here on the right is almost 6 inches of rain over a course of 24 hours just a few years ago. And we actually had lunch and all headed back out into the fields to continue our work after the final 1.5 inches of rain that fell during our lunch period. So as part of our guiding principles, we're always focusing on disturbing the soil as little as possible. So that is part of why we're here today, right? So we're going to be talking about ways to enact that on a small scale without the use of heavy machinery. This image over here on the left shows that so there's 2 hands, and I don't have a pointer. Do I have a pointer? I do. Okay, so over here on the right is an example of soil that has been plowed or tilled, and over here on the left is soil that has been undisturbed for almost 3 years. So in this image you can see a considerable amount of soil structure that has been maintained through our practices. You can see different colors in the soil. You can see air pockets, exudates from previous crops in there. And so these are constant examples that we get to witness through the process of disturbing the soil as little as possible. This image right here was taken on a year that we had a really serious drought. And so we could bear witness to the fact that this plant, who was in great need of water, actually went almost 2 feet down below the soil surface to find what it needed and then ultimately be able to provide food for us. So here's a little visual of what it means to be working in a no-tilled system versus a plowed system. For the purpose of this class, just to clarify, we will our no-till system is all done by hand. So there are no-till systems that incorporate various implements on tractors, of which I cannot speak to at all, and neither can Matt. So in this example here, you can see that there's, we are constantly relying on an incredible amount of crop debris, and which helps to increase the organism activity. There's various pathways through water infiltration and the earthworms and various bacteria and all the microorganisms that we can't see. In a plowed system, there is a plow pan area. So there's this wall that is hit that does not allow organic matter to move through, water to move through, and for nutrients to rise up. And so we are the farm that we are on actually had been mostly pasture, but there were some areas that many years ago, 50 years or so ago, had been plowed, and we've come up against, I should say, this plow pan, and have been able to see a significant shift within the second year of our practices. So one of our other guiding principles is really to maximize biodiversity. Since we are predominantly a vegetable farm, vegetables, flowers, and herbs, some fruits and perennials are incorporated into that as well. So we are seeking to maximize biodiversity through the choices that we make in the crops that we grow, which is about 75 different crops over a course of a year, and as well as through thinking about maximizing biodiversity both above and below the soil. So I was just speaking a little bit to what happens below the soil. Above the soil, we every year continue to see this incredible shift and growth of wildlife diversity. This is a fantastic photo, actually. That
who took that photo?
I think Matt took that photo. So this is a picture. We have a hawk family that has stayed with us for a number of years now, and this trellising system, it was for our tomatoes. And Matt actually well, you can speak to it.
Yeah, well, talking about diversity, the hawk family, we would literally catch ourselves staring at the mother, teaching the little babies how to soar and stuff, and then one day they finally came to us and used our tomato trellises as perches. And we would be standing from me to Jen, and they would be screeching right next to us. But they were just looking for all the mice that we had as we would walk around and scurry away. So toads, mice.
The bird. We have killdeer that nest in our field. So if anyone's familiar with birds, killdeer are really sensitive to being in undisturbed areas. So every year, actually multiple times throughout a season now, 4 times this year.
3 to 4.
There were multiple hatchlings, which was another testament to our disturbing the soil as little as possible. But the biodiversity that we're seeing and literally seeing increase on this land space from year to year is significant. It's noticeable, it's palpable, and it's happening both above and below the soil. So one of the things that we're constantly doing is watching and observing. So we're standing in a space of recognizing that nature and the earth is our greatest teacher, and by bearing witness to the natural biorhythms that exist all around us and even within us, we're able to relate that back to our practices on a regular basis. There's a more scientific word for that. Biomimicry is a more scientific word for that. But it's something that we really do intentionally on a regular basis, not just throughout a given season, but from a day-to-day basis. And we'll touch upon that a little bit throughout our conversation. So another guiding principle that we have is to focus on giving back more than we take. And so that's something we're going to be speaking to a lot today. This example here on the right, we'll be diving deeper into. This is a wood chip mulch application that has a few other components happening around it. And so we are intentionally giving back to the soil more than we take, we're also giving back to our community in a way that is more than we take. And so education is a key component of the work that we're doing. Having our space be a safe space for all people to be able to take refuge and solace in is really important to us. And that is something that continually guides our goals from year to year. So the final guiding principle that we have is keeping the soil covered as much as possible. We do this in a number of different ways. We do this through cover crops and mulching. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of that now. We're going to discuss exactly what is a cover crop and what is a mulch, because we had a lot of conversation about that as we were crafting this workshop. And we're going to go through some really specific examples along the way as we discuss how we keep the soil covered as much as possible.
So Jen just gave a really quick overview of our farm. Is there any questions now? Because we want to make sure now we're getting into the cover crops and mulches that you guys kind of understand where we're coming from. Is there anything that you guys pretty much get it? You're cool. Okay. So cover crops and mulches. All right. As we go through this, we want to make sure it's a conversation, so please speak up if you have a question. We have a lot of knowledge, I like to think, so we want to share it, but sometimes we don't think of the question that we need to be answering for you. So as we go through this, in your guys' head, start thinking about what is your goal, what is the cash crop, or what cash crop is it being utilized with, whether that is, are you going to plant beans, are you going to plant corn, what are you planning on doing with the bed after you're using this cover crop or mulch? How much time do you have? Do you have abundant amount of time? You can kick it, you can do, take your time with the crop. Can you cut it down? Can you be there for whatever you're putting down, basically?
Yeah, when thinking about how much time do you have, we're also considering that through the lens of successive crop production. How many people in the room are commercial farmers? Okay, so almost half. Great. Okay. So we're because our farm is a production farm, and our goal is to average $100,000 an acre annually. Our successive crop production is really, really high. So a given bed space has a turnover from 2 to 4 crops in the season, and we have something growing year round without supplemental heat on our farm. So there's going to be people. We acknowledge that people are going to be thinking about this in different ways, and there are full workshops that we offer on successive crop production, so we'll be able to touch upon some of it.
Yeah, so like Jen was saying, we're always keeping an eye on what we intend to come after. Okay, what is a cover crop? We had a good talk about this as we were doing this, but we figured we'd make it very, very simple. Any plants that are sown for the purpose of covering soil. Okay, that was very intentional. Why we said any plants. Okay, not just your ones we'll talk, or some of the ones we'll talk about. Benefits of cover crops: increased biodiversity. Okay, so that comes from attracting insects, pollinators, organisms, feeding organisms in the soil, creating a habitat for different organisms, or maybe toads or salamanders, whatever. It will help attract as a habitat for increased biodiversity. Erosion control. You're putting roots in the ground. Those roots are going to inevitably latch onto some soil and hold that soil in place. Okay, so when you get 6 inches in 24 hours, it's not going to all wash away on you. It's also creating exudates into the soil, which feed back bacteria and fungi, which are then themselves creating a coherent soil structure that will make it stay in place, whether that's through their own stuff they exude to stick on to soil or the hyphae that they produce. Water retention. Cover crops, as water falls to the ground and it's a warm day, can start to evaporate. As it evaporates, it wants to go up to the sky and float away somewhere else. The cover crops help to keep moisture low to the ground, keep it on the ground so that it doesn't evaporate and fly away. Also roots, another thing, they're helping to create that soil structure. That soil structure then inherently helps you retain moisture in your soil. Reduce compaction, rainfall. Rain on your bare soil will inevitably start to compact, okay? Cover crops help to shield your soil. The roots help to break up compaction if you're already at a very compacted state. It helps to create waterways, airflow down into the ground. Beneficial organisms, very similar to increased biodiversity, but we're thinking of the microbes now in particular. They are in your soil, they're feeding, they're reproducing, they're dying, they're creating carbon, they're creating other, or they're developing access to other minerals and nutrients for your plants. The cover crops are photosynthesizing, sending sugars down into the ground to help those organisms survive, creating that habitat they like to live. Biomass. You are actively growing with a cover crop. You're growing biomass. So depending on how you treat the cover crop, it can be producing nitrogen for you. It can be producing carbon. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But you're basically producing your own, eventually your own mulch, really. Weed control. Certain ones we'll talk about have the capacity to be allelopathic, which means that they help keep weed seed germination down. They actually are secreting stuff that prevents the seeds from germinating, whereas some are shading out seeds, preventing light getting to them so that the weed seeds on the surface aren't germinating. Carbon sequestration. You're taking it out of the air, you're putting it into the ground where you want it to be for your biome that you're creating. That soil structure, all those little organisms in there are carbon-based, for the most part, carbon-based organisms. They need that carbon. You want it in the ground. We want to take it out of the air. We want to live here for the next million years. So, shading. You're creating shade for the soil to regulate the temperature, so you don't have quick swings over the course of the day. The sun isn't rising and instantly going up to 100 degrees. That shade, that trapping of the water vapors, helps keep it in a homeostasis manner. And finally, increased aeration and waterways, mostly through the roots. Especially when you're done with the cover crop and you're going to mow it down, in any way that you are, those roots are going to stay in the ground and they're going to start to decompose. As they decompose, that creates airways, waterways for your soil. Questions? That was a lot.
Does anyone have anything to add to the list? You do it right?
Looks nicer.
It looks nicer.
It
does.
It makes you feel good seeing green
Right.
or yellow, whatever flower. Yeah.
Some like buckwheat can contribute to pollinators.
Exactly.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Pollinators. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
If you do let some of these go to seed, they attract a lot of pollinators. Mm-hmm. They can do a lot for increasing honey. Yeah.
Mustard, like bioaccumulate?
Say that again?
Mustard cover crop, like bioaccumulate?
Yeah, bioaccumulate. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on how you said cover crops can prevent the weed seeds from germinating. Like, how does that?
Yeah, I know it's crazy. Right.
Yeah. We have a specific example.
Yeah, we'll give you a
specific
example. That's a great question.
That's a good question.
How it works. Yeah.
When you're using plants that could be considered weedy as a cover crop, how do you talk about how to manage them when it's time to sow that space?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. That's a great thing to be thinking about. Think about what's coming next. Anything else? Okay. So let's go into the cover crops that we're focusing on today. Okay, the reason we're focusing on these cover crops, these are what we have experience with in our system. They're not everything. They're not all the options. Like someone brought up mustard. These are the ones that we have been playing with, and we say playing with just because we are actively experimenting in new ways and how to use them, how to work with them appropriately, and this is the culmination of the last few years of experiments that we've really found worked with our system. So we have cash crops, which we'll explain first, red and white clover, buckwheat, alfalfa, and winter rye. We'll just go right in. So first off, the first cover crop that we actually thought of, we talked about this, and what most of you have experience with is your cash crops, okay? They are literally covering the soil, okay? So we wanted to start here first in thinking about your spacing. How do you space your cash crops, okay? So we have an example of our lettuce planting here. Over here on the left side, we have an example of a 10-foot square, 24-inch spaced lettuce. You can see it yields about 240 lettuces. But most importantly, look at the space that is developed by doing that.
This isn't to give some context, it's so 10 feet wide, but it's a 50-foot row. Mm-hmm. So our entire farm is systemized to be 50-foot long rows, 30 inches wide and 12-inch aisles.
Mm-hmm. So over here you got this one, and all this negative space, this blue space here, that's the soil, okay? So theoretically, that's the soil you would be looking to cover with, let's say, a cover crop. Or you come over to this side, like Jen was saying, this is our model over here, where we have a 30-inch bed, and we're using 10-inch spacing on the lettuces. We give it a 12-inch aisle so we can squeeze our feet in there and walk up and down our 50-foot beds. We get 450 lettuces out of the same square footage. And we don't have to worry as much about covering that soil because the lettuces themselves are doing the job that we would have, say, a buckwheat, alfalfa, or a mulch do. So thinking about spacing and having a biointensive mindset, you can utilize your crops to cover that soil, shade it out, making sure that no weeds are germinating underneath them. And it will retain the moisture. It will retain beneficial organisms, put roots in the ground. When we are done with a lettuce crop, we twist the heads out. By twisting the heads out, that kills the roots, and they're left in the ground. So those roots are going to hang on until they decompose. But what that also does, prevents the soil erosion, and we can go right in and plant another crop pretty much within the same, in a few hours. We can have another crop in that bed. Questions? Yes?
So when do you ignore what it says on the seed packet about density and how the distance?
Almost always.
Always.
Actually, pretty much on our farm, almost always, I'd say.
Yeah.
It's and I would say a lot of the spacing that we regularly utilize on the farm came from a number of years of just pushing that envelope, literally, like seeing that and saying, okay, the seed packet says this, but what if we did this? And then sometimes having that experience of, we put this crop too close, so the lettuce, for example, we had it 12 by 12, and then we said, what if we did 10 by 10? And 10 by 10 didn't work, so then we said, what if we did 12 by 10? Yeah. And so those kind of examples, as I said, we do. A whole other workshop can be spent on significant data that we have found over the years. This infographic doesn't show it properly. I think that there's a photo afterwards that shows that the density of these plants when they're in their full maturity are touching each other, so you can't even see. So this is not even at its full maturity yet. I couldn't find the right photo for that, but it's very close for this lettuce specifically. But in general, this image is actually showing A number of cash crops. There are some there in the background, and we'll be delving into that further. We also have winter rye, we have buckwheat and alfalfa being utilized in another space. But the cash crops themselves, through this planting, as Matt was saying, when these are in their fullest and ready for harvest, we are just able to put our feet through that.
Yeah.
When you're just starting out and you still have some weeds,
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle weeding when the seeds are so close together? Is that harder?
Well, so it really depends on what crop you're dealing with. So we do transplants.
Okay.
So we started these all in the greenhouse, and we do them in 806s because our beds are 50 feet long. So we know an 806 tray will get one row complete. So we go, okay, we need 3 trays. That will make these 3 rows of lettuces. They go in, they're really small, we can hoe around them. A lot of time when we're prepping beds, if it's for carrots, we'll also do flame weeding. But for most of this stuff, like especially with the scallions, we can hoe around that pretty much most of the time that it's in there.
And with this system being utilized, we really only have to go in and hoe once, and then after that point, the crops themselves shade out the weeds. We're also, because we're in a no-till system where we're not disturbing the soil, we are not pulling those sleeping weeds that are lying below up.
Yeah.
So, and we're also not allowing any weeds that are germinating to go to full seed. So we're utilizing the weeds before they flower as a green manure and giving back to the soil in that way.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Have you guys seen a significant reduction, I'm guessing, in weeds since you first started?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So much.
It really goes to that point of not turning the soil off, because the weed seeds are going to be there for the next 1,000 years. You're never going to get rid of them all. But by doing our process of just laying compost on the top, mulching from the top down, you're creating like a lasagna or a strata that you're pushing those weed seeds further down. So the more you can do that without, say, going in there and flipping everything over, those are just keep going down, 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 and you're left with a pretty pristine, if you got good compost and not introducing seeds, you got a good chance of knocking them back, if not all. This bed is garden 6, which is about, I want to say,
This is 5. Well,
it's almost 7.
Yeah. Well,
7 years.
half of it is 5 years, and the other half is 7.
So
Yeah.
parts of this garden are about 7 years old, and the weed seeds are non-existent almost. You know,
There's a few outliers.
Few outliers, and that's mostly coming from, there might be some in the field get blown in, and you might see it, but rarely.
Do you always plant lettuce in that same bed?
No, so that's a great question. So we actually make sure that in any given bed space, we're not planting any crop from the same family for 4 cycles. So, and that's really important to maintaining that biodiversity, to creating different spaces for roots to grow, and different nutrients that need to be drawn and given back. And so,
and this could be a whole nother.
Yes.
This is entirely another workshop. So we'll just keep moving forward a little bit. Yeah.
Just on your using cash crops as cover crops, when you were honing in those ratios with the lettuce, did you have to then switch lettuce varieties in order to make that work, or were you just using the same variety with different spacings?
Well, I think a lot of it has come from experimentation and what's available on the market.
Okay.
Pete, who isn't here, he does a lot of seed selecting. But for the most part, like Skypost here has been around for the last 6 years at least. I've been
We've done it
way
for-
longer, for sure.
Yeah, 15
So it's been more of like playing with what we find is the nicest lettuce we can sell, and then playing with the proportions after that. Because the 10-12 spacing ends up creating a really nice rose head type lettuce.
there's also different ways that we manage the harvest. So what we will often do with lettuce, for example, is that we harvest out the middle row, maybe a little bit smaller, and then allow the 2 outside rows to continue to fill in and get to its fullest size. So there's a systematic approach to the harvest as well.
Which is 10 and which is 12?
So the rows are 10, and the spacing is 12. So right here, this way, these rows are spaced 10 inches apart, and then horizontally they're spaced 12. This is an example of another dual system that we have. This is our hog paneling trellises that we put together. They're growing peas in spring, and this is a spring cut and come again lettuce. So 30-inch bed.
This is the trellising is over 2 beds.
It's over 2 beds. So the peas are growing up. So we have a row of peas here on the edge of the bed, and another row of peas in a different bed on the edge. So they're growing up the trellises, and underneath we put some lettuce, some cut and come again, that we're using it in 2 different ways. We can get money out of it, we can harvest it, but we can also just make it a cover crop and turn it into mulch like that if we wanted to. So we did both things. We harvested a bunch out, we sold some, and then the second flush cut we let stay there, and then we ended up just
So you just cut it at
Just-
the base and
yeah.
let it stay?
if we wanted to, yeah.
Right, and then would you have to cover it again with something else, or just let it be?
Lettuce, it'll just wilt and die. If we wanted to do that. This one, we harvested a lot of this round. The peas also, as they grow up, they provide shade. So you're going from spring, you're going into summer. Summer's getting warmer, warmer, warmer. The peas are helping to shade your lettuce to keep it a little bit cooler. Also, peas are given a little bit of nitrogen. They're nitrogen fixing. But the lettuce also is helping to keep the peas roots cool, especially as you're going into summer. So they'll stay on longer.
How do you access the red lettuce harvest?
You get down on your knees and you get a bucket and you just do a little one of these, chop chop, keep going. It's really nice if you're not 6 feet tall.
It's also really nice if you're not over the age of 40.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is a little bit of finesse. All right. So we're going to talk about seeding times of non-cash crop cover crops. As you can see here, this is a picture of Pete putting some, I believe that's winter rye down. Let's start with red clover. Okay, April to May, if you seed in that range, when you can, temperature permitting, weather permitting, that is going to get well established in that year and maybe even start fixing nitrogen. You can see here we have some red clover that was established within the year. This is under our tomatoes. This was taken in December, so just last, not even a month ago, probably 2 months ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Beginning of December. You can see we'll talk about the wood mulch in a second, but we have it in our 12-inch aisle. Red clover is really nice. It can kind of withstand some foot traffic, so it might die back a little bit, but it flushes out really nicely again. Beneficial insects. It attracts a lot of bees. But it is a little bit of a higher grower. It will grow a little bit taller than what we'll talk about next, which is white clover. June and August, you can also seed up to like August 12th.
August 20th.
20th, excuse me. And that will be for the following year. It will get established, and then it will just lie dormant. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, we generally stick by the rule of August 20th because that gives enough time for the seed to germinate and get big enough to be able to just withstand a frost and continue on until the next season.
Mm-hmm. Other thing, mostly surface roots, so it's not getting super deep into the ground if you're thinking about penetrating hard soil.
When do you get your first frost?
I would say we used to say September 15th.
Right.
It's been a long time. It's been 7-8 years since we've had September 15th. So I would say more like October 1st to October 15th. These numbers that we're going off of for August 20th is for October 1st frost.
White clover, very similar dates. But it is, we separated them out just because the white clover is a little bit nicer for low growing ground cover. We have it here pictured underneath our pepper plants this year. So we have some wooded mulched paths. We have some white clover that we hand cast underneath the peppers. Another thing to talk about is clovers really benefit from potentially having a nurse crop, which we'll talk about, is winter rye we've been doing it with. So the rye grows really quickly, prevents weed seeds in the soil from germinating because you're casting your clover seeds on the soil surface, so they're not getting any of the potential effect of the allelopathic compounds from the winter rye, and it gives the clover a chance to get established underneath it.
The white clover has the root systems of the white clover is that they will they lay and spread, as opposed to a red clover that is just more of a single bushier area. And so what Matt was speaking to about the height of the red clover versus the white clover is something that we learned from experience of. For example, seeding red clover underneath the peppers, and then realizing that the red clover in really healthy soils gets particularly big, and and then starts to completely shade out the crop. And so the white clover is something that we've come to be able to really rely on as staying as a low grower without as deep of a root system, and is also easier to remove for the next crop.
And it works really well with shuffle hoes. So if you have it on a border, you can, shovel hoe what's creeping in, and then allow the plant to keep growing. You don't have to get rid of the whole plant. It's not super invasive. Yeah.
Quick question about the clover. So if you were using it in a path, does the nitrogen fixing spread into the bed, or is it a lost benefit?
Yeah, is it a lost benefit? I don't think it's a lost benefit. I personally don't think. I mean, it depends on the crop that's being grown in the bed. If you're, depending on the spacing of that, because if in our situation, if it's a 30-inch bed and there's a plant that's 15 inches from the edge of an aisle, that's a little far. But when we're talking about developing these systems that are a little bit deeper, and we might be incorporating a mulch in that is then reaching to that living cover crop, I feel there's a relationship that's there, and the extension feels a little bit less. And with the red clover and white clover in a lot of these areas, we're allowing them to live long enough to become nitrogen fixing, but they're not keeping necessarily from year after year. So the root, a lot of times people ask about how do we manage it from becoming a weed, where we're removing it after a season, and introducing something else there.
And I think it also depends on what crop you're doing it with. If you've got a zucchini plant and it's reaching far and wide with its roots, it's going to interact if you have clover nearby. You're also we are not obviously
Interacting what way?
Well, so the roots are going to end up interacting with the roots of the clover, for example, through the organisms that are feeding off the clover. They're going to be spreading nitrogen in the ground. Organisms are going to eat that or process that, exude it. The zucchini plant might pick it up through some pathway of its absorbance through organisms or nutrients or other manners. They're not going to actually be binded together. There's
I just thought of an example of where it was actually a detriment to us. So because red clover and white clover are nitrogen-fixing crops, when we had it in our cut flower garden, we actually experienced too much vigorous leaf growth and not enough flowers from that. So we stopped using red clover and white clover in that area.
We had the most beautiful green leaves you had ever seen. Just no flowers.
Do you ever plant starts directly into an established bed of white clover, like the second year?
Not necessarily white clover, but some other cover crops, which
without killing the cover crop.
Not without killing it.
Crushing it.
We'll talk about that. Yeah. Okay. So buckwheat.
Any reason you avoid crimson clover, or haven't talked about it yet?
I think it's mostly about availability. I think we at our local store they sell pounds of white and red clover.
But But-
it's just access.
But NOFA Mass has a bulk order that
Yeah.
that you can definitely get. Yeah.
Yeah. Because most of the time we're like, oh, we need some, and we go down the store.
We're actually trying to get better because
Yeah.
we're now for some of this into
Yeah.
our 5th year of really
Yeah.
being reliant on. I feel like we can look at those
can
numbers
start.
a little bit more and say, okay, we're going to need
Yeah.
450 pounds of winter rye in order to do a season. So, in which case, NOFA Mass bulk order would be really
Bulk order,
helpful.
NOFA Mass bulk order. Buckwheat, May 15th to August 15th. Really fast grower. So we're avoiding the frost days because it's really frost intolerant. It's a great cover crop if you're going to put some beds away for a month, and don't have anything to do, just for a month. So you throw those down, grows really fast. Depending on how you space it and how you cast it, you can curtail it to either growing more nitrogen, like talking about growing more leaves. So that means having fewer seeds, so they're spread apart farther, so they're becoming more bushier and wider, the plants of buckwheat, versus really tight spacing where they're going to grow straight up, grow a thicker stalk, and start to go into seed quicker. So you do a lot tighter spacing on the buckwheat, so it grows closer together, causing that stalk to form. So when you go to cut it down, or in any way, you can kind of control what you're putting onto the soil, whether that be more nitrogen with the leaves or more carbon with the stalks.
Buckwheat is a good one just to have around all
Yeah.
the time, as Matt was saying. It's something that can just be quickly
Yeah.
cast, and in this moment of we're not sure what we're going to be doing with this spot, which there's not many areas that happens with, but sometimes there might be a delay on a transplant that's coming in. As Matt had said, we have 70% of our farm is operated through transplants, and the other 30% are direct seeds or perennial crops. And so we do have a tight system down on that, but the buckwheat is just a great, quick cover crop to always have on hand.
So an example we'll run through really quickly here is our tomatoes from a few years ago. You can see we ended up doing the aisle in between. We used wood chip and leaf mulch, which we'll talk about in a bit, right up against the plants, creating a little bit of a buffer. So we had our cover crop through the middle here.
That's winter rye.
There is some winter rye in it. And then you can see, there's some winter rye from where we had cut down before, but we'll talk about it in a second.
There was a question in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you experimented at all with harvesting the alfalfa or the rye or the buckwheat and selling it, or cooking with it or anything?
No, pretty much we have only experimented with cutting it down and laying it right down.
But
so
I really like that idea.
I love it.
Yes.
Where you're going with that.
Yes.
So here we had under there, in this trial that we were doing, we ended up realizing the buckwheat was growing really fast and getting kind of high and starting to shade the tomatoes / also preventing airflow through our tomatoes. So we were like, okay, we got to get in there, get under there, and we gave this job to a small person.
Not child labor.
Not child labor. And we went through and mowed it down with some shears and ended up just laying it all right down onto the surface of the soil.
How tall is it underneath this?
You can, I'm sure, but
I can fit through. I have to go like this, though.
Maybe you're standing.
I'm
you're
standing.
standing.
Yeah, they're very tall.
they're 8 feet tall on each side.
Yeah, each year our tomatoes will go up over the top and start vining elsewhere, trying to find places.
And then back to your question about utilizing it as a grain. So one of our visions would be to actually have a space that we can allow to rest a little bit more. Right now, we're literally using with every workable space that we have on the farmland that we currently keep, and so we, in order to get the production level that we need, we don't really have any real larger spaces of fallow land, and so the vision would be to be able to actually be harvesting grain and making mulches, throughout from another area.
Be making our own mulch would be nice. Yeah.
Are you irrigating?
No.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yes.
And that's actually an important thing to consider along the way. So through our practices, and as our soil has been enriched over the years, we find that the only time we do an irrigation is when we do, transplant, and we have just 3 soaker hoses that we put right next to, or anywhere from 1 to 3, depending on what the bed is being planted with, that we use, and we put the transplants in. They're well watered before we put them in, and then we irrigate them for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and we don't have to irrigate again. We don't have any comprehensive irrigation system on our farm. We have, in the 15 years of doing this, have not needed to do that.
Yeah, we use basically we have a pump and we have basically a garden hose, like a 300-foot or about a few hundred feet of garden hose connected together to get up in the field, and we water each crop in, like you're saying, with those. Partially too, the soil has such aeration and porosity that it retains its moisture really well. Even this past season, when it started getting pretty dry, we had to see rain a little bit, you could still stick your fingers in and dig down an inch or two, and there was moisture there. So you got to imagine that, we've been working really hard at breaking the hard pan up. So water wants to come up. Water wants to come up from deep down, and like the root we saw earlier, it's down there. But if you have a really dry soil and there's nothing happening, there's going to be no suction for it to come up. It's not going to want to rise up to meet your roots. It's just going to stay down and go find another way to get out.
When we're thinking about any type of casting that we're doing with cover crops, we really work in tandem with the weather as much as possible. So we will change our whole plan of the day to be able to do casting seeds if we see that there's rain coming in later on in the evening, or and so we do typically rely on that in order for the germination to be successful.
Yeah, most of these are seeded when we're expecting rains, not a deluge and a flood, but a good steady rain to get things to germinate.
All right, so are you saying that with all of these cover crops, you direct seed them?
So we hand cast. Yeah. And we'll drag, a rake over them to kind of get a little bit of better soil contact, and then, that might be.
Or we use a roller.
Or if depending on the area, we could use a roller too to get a little bit more compaction. Not much.
So when you're direct seeding your cash crops, you also just wait for rain, or do you water those?
You can't always wait for rain. You got to get them in on the day. So we use the soaker hoses.
So I was just curious, what about 2016? Were you guys significantly affected or have less yield from the drought that year?
2016, aside from this year, 2016 was the best year we've ever had.
Yeah. A lot of people were having issues with water.
Yeah.
The biggest issue was just getting the carrots to germinate. So we just left soakers or
we actually use the oscillating hoses on our seeded crop. So we have one oscillating hose that will set up in the 50-foot bed, an oscillating hose at its full capacity. We just have to move it twice, and it will cover actually several.
It'll be about 8 beds.
It covers about 8 beds, so that we have used. Yeah.
So in the transition to no-till or mulching, whatever, between that photo you showed of the flooding and inundation of your crops, did you break up the hard pan in any way? Is it just these practices over time, or did you do some mechanical means to break up whatever?
It's pretty much everything that we practice is ending up trying to break up that hard pan in different ways.
But it's all by hand.
But it's all by hand.
It's all by plant material.
U-bar. There's no mechanical magic button that we could press.
No, we don't have any machinery. Even the U-bar broad fork that we have doesn't go down that deep.
Yeah.
So it's all.
And what's your sense now of why you were experiencing that flooding? Was it because of the neglect of the field at the time, or is it
soil structure.
There's no soil structure, and so the lack of soil structure in conjunction with that hard pan just left nothing for, no place for that water to go, and no real clear pathways for it to move through.
Yeah.
How deep is the high pan?
It's as deep as the plow, so it's usually within 18 inches to 3 feet. But usually within the first 18 inches, you'll come across a pretty seriously hard layer.
Wow. Alfalfa, April to May for the given year, just similar to clover. June to August, 20th again for the following season. Alfalfa does have a pretty good taproot, so be aware of that if you're putting it in the ground. Some people can find it to be a little bit much if you want to get it out. If you want to get it out quickly, it might not be the solution you're looking for, like a clover. So we have it here underneath our peas. This was not really a surprise, but it was a little surprising. This alfalfa had been seeded the year before, and we had gone through a winter, and it came back up. So we were like, oh, that's interesting, that's cool. Let's put our peas there this year, and let that alfalfa stay as a cover crop.
No, I was just going to say there's winter rye in the background.
Yeah.
And I want to just emphasize the fact that we're showing a lot of pictures with trellises, but there's other ones that don't incorporate trellises. We don't only subject ourselves to weird positions to deal with cover
crops. There just happens to be a lot of trellises in this workshop. We'll take better pictures for next year. Winter rye, April 15th to September 15th, allelopathic effects. So it has been seen to prevent weed germination in the soil where you plant it. So if you're thinking about putting it in a place where you're going to be direct seeding carrots or something, might not be the best year or best idea to do that right in the same year. So here we got it. Again, trellises. Sorry.
Oh, we put the trellises up after the seeding and the mulch. That's another.
That's very important. So we have again wood mulch. We have the rye coming up. Very quick grower. Also very nice. Really thick root mass. So it produces a lot of biomass, especially when you cut it down. That root mass will stay in there. So here it is, growing up underneath some tomatoes. It's growing quickly. And then when it gets to this height, we found that it works really nice to cut it down at when it's tasseling.
Actually, it's essential.
It's pretty much.
Unless you're going to remove the root system, which can be done with, we sometimes have utilized winter rye in a way that if we seed it during the early summer, it will actually, or late spring to early summer, it will actually grow and then go dormant during the later summer months. So it doesn't actually get this big.
Yes.
This got this big because we had seeded it the fall before.
Yeah.
And then when we're allowing it to be in this space, this is a 2-foot wide aisle that's just
horizontal across our beds.
Right. And so we ended up choosing to have the winter rye be the cover crop in that area so that we could then turn it into a straw. Mm-hmm. And what we learned also the hard way is that unless it's tasseled, unless it's flowering, which there might be another photo of that, if we were to spend the time to cut that down either with hedge pruners or by a scythe or mowing it, it comes back.
Yeah, so make sure you're aware that it's you want it to cut it. If you want something quick, buckwheat, right? If you want something that's going to take a lot more time, you're not going to use it right away, winter rye is really nice.
So if you cut it before that stage,
it will come back.
And if you cut it after that stage?
If you cut it at this height where it's tasseling, it's going to die.
It's straw.
It will be straw. Yeah. So the roots will die, it won't come back.
Yeah.
Well, this is still before seed, so we're not waiting for the seeds to finish out. They are tasseling.
But they're not fully mature.
But they're not
there's
fully
some
mature.
Outliers, and you absolutely want to be careful of that.
Yeah. You might have one go to seed early.
Yeah, you definitely want to be careful of that. And the other thing to be thinking about with this is because it's so much biomass. For one, it can create an incredible amount of shading, and it has a very deep root system. It takes a ton of water, and it will take from the plants that are growing next to it. So
when we played with it, we had we put it in with our zucchini in the aisles to test it. And we started seeing the effect in the zucchini. We're starting to shut down prematurely. So we ended up getting in there and really going at it to knock it down.
With a shovel hub.
With a shovel
hub.
hub.
Killing the roots.
To kill the roots quickly. And we didn't let it get to this. Because we saw it shut down. Like, oh no, it's not going to...
And within 2 days, the plants respond. They were starting to yellow.
Yeah.
And we didn't do anything else other than stop the root system of the winter rye. And within a couple of days, they started to respond.
Yeah. Yes?
Oh.
I mean, you.
We don't have. Well.
We cut it.
We cut it. We could.
Verdict is still out for us personally on that.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah.
We cut it to make sure it was going down. Otherwise, with the zucchini, we ended up getting there with a shovel out and really ripping it out, getting in there and having to do a little bit of labor.
Quick question.
Yeah.
The allelopathic effect, just affects germination. It doesn't stunt seedlings.
As far as I know, it doesn't affect transplants. It's in the top 6 inches. The roots are matting. Germination has been found to be affected. But if it's already germinated, already a plant, already growing, as far as the big dub.
So we only use it near transplants.
Near transplants.
Yeah. Do you guys plant vetch with the rye ever?
We have not really experimented with it. I know other people do. O'Hara, he was saying he does. Brian O'Hara does a mix in his beds.
Yeah. We do, and it helps, I think, with nitrogen, because if I'm not mistaken, rye doesn't produce a lot of nitrogen.
It doesn't,
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Here's another option if you're doing large swath of land solarization. These are old greenhouse plastics that we've retooled and lay out. And once we lay down a cover crop, we can put these over and it will heat up the soil and serve the soil and take them out for good.
And how long do you leave that on?
Depends on the time of the year, so the strength of the sun.
Yeah.
We can't use it at all in the fall. We found in the late spring, it could be up to a week that we have it on. In the midsummer, it's 2 days at most. So I think there have been times we've experimented and ended up leaving it for 2 weeks. It later on in the fall, and it's just not a strong enough sun time of year.
Is there a benefit to using this than a silage tarp, black plastic?
Using oculation, a black one. Is that what you're saying? Well, I think for this, it's quick. It's quick. It's really quick.
It gets hotter faster.
Yeah.
Whereas like the black, you're looking to suppress the photosynthesis. Where this is heating up really
and
quick.
burning it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is, what was that? Hand. We had these. We didn't have to go find them. We didn't have to go buy anything. All right.
So, for the interest of this discussion, we considered having an organic mulch as something, as materials that are, or once were living plant materials that are placed on the soil surface. So what we've just been going through now is more, would be considered more of a living. We have mixed feelings about this because there's life and bioactivity that's happening in this. But what Matt was focusing on just now was an actively living photosynthesizing crop. In this, we're going to go on to the organic mulches. So there's many overlaps for the benefits of the organic mulches, although actually our list is a little bit shorter. And the water retention, erosion control, reduced compaction, inoculants, expansion is not something that we touched upon within the cover crop systems. Increased biomass, weed control, temperature stabilization is something that we can rely on much more through mulches. And the disease control, we have experienced, specifically with being able to keep soil splash coming up on particular crops, like tomatoes, for example, the disease control has shifted, or the disease has shifted immensely from through our mulching. So the organic mulches that we're going to speak to are wood chips. We're going to get into explaining like green wood chips versus aged wood chips, soft versus hard wood. We'll cover the leaves and then just generally speaking decomposing vegetable matter, which is our previous cash crop in this situation. So a lot of these you're going to see combinations, and you probably noticed it in some of the previous slides. So this situation, it was actually also from this year, and it was goes back to a struggle that we were having with a cover crop. So we had peppers and eggplants in a given area. We had seeded clover directly underneath the plant material, and then what we had done in the aisles initially was we planted rye, and what we found was that the biomass of the rye itself just started to put a strain on the plants, like Matt was speaking to in the zucchini, not as much in the peppers and eggplants, but we definitely started to see a strain, and we were not able to suppress the growth of the rye. So that goes back to the timing that we had expressed about when to be seeding the rye. What happened with this is that we seeded it later, and it just was so vigorous that we couldn't knock it down. We went in here twice with a shuffle hoe, and it was kind of frighteningly vigorous. Yeah. So what we ended up doing in this situation was we laid down cardboard. We laid down cardboard and then aged wood chips on it. And one thing that became a benefit then, even though it was a lot of effort at the time to deal with it, the cardboard and wood chips were laid later on in the season, not quite this late, obviously, but later on in the season, and that will be ready for the spring for us to be utilizing. So we weighed that benefit during this time. The wood chips that we use are always sought after. So I have been known to chase down tree service vehicles. I highly recommend it. It's thrilling, and especially the ones that are really big, and then I can like jump up on the little ladder to get their attention. And so we have formed relationships with various tree service people, and in some years we have the real benefit of our town might be doing a considerable amount of tree work, and so we make sure to form a relationship with whatever company they've hired. They are equally as excited. I don't know if you know this, but tree companies have to pay to get rid of their wood chips, and they often have to drive a good distance. They cannot move their wood chips from state to state. So sometimes companies from another state, we're close to Connecticut, we're close to New York, they are coming in from other states, and they have to go through a lot of effort to find a place for their wood chips and pay for it. So they are very excited to be working with us.
Make it easy on them too. Don't necessarily go up to someone who's like 20 miles away from you, because they might not want to go another 20 miles to dump somewhere. Right. So try to find someone who's just down the road in the town who is relatively close. Get to know them and make it easy for them to dump. We basically we're hands off now. We can just point up the road, say, you'll see the piles, just dump up there. Make it easy, they will come.
Yeah. So we never work with green meaning fresh wood chips. As tempting as it may be, we learned that the hard way. We learned that by utilizing the fresh wood chips, there's too much carbon that's there, and so it draws all of the nutrients from the plants that we're growing. So we work with wood chips that have been aged for at least a year, ideally 2 years. So we have a rotation going. We have a tractor on our farm. Our tractor is used for managing wood chips, leaf mulches, and our compost pile. And so this is an image of very active native inoculants in our wood chips. And so we're looking for this. This example over here on the left, this is fresh green wood chips. This is 2-year-old wood chips on the right-hand side. And so there's a significant difference, and you can see how this then becomes a mutually beneficial relationship as opposed to an extractive relationship, which on every level I'm constantly trying to step away from extractive relationships.
Big pile out in the open. Yeah. We make sure that when we're getting it delivered, we just ask them, is it softwood, predominantly softwood, or is it hardwood? Okay. A lot of the softwoods we end up using on paths rather than actually putting them in beds. So we'll make sure that the softwoods are only being used on paths where we're walking. Just because a lot of softwoods have like terpenes and other stuff that prevents either decay, or it won't allow beneficial organisms to really start inoculating it as hardwoods do. Hardwoods will allow the fungi to really get in there and start going. Also,
No, I was just thinking we will accept softwoods.
Yeah.
We keep them in a separate pile, and on our farm we have some areas that might be utilized as permanent pathways. So the pathway to our CSA pickup area, for example, we lay down those softwood chips, or I guess that's the name.
Yeah.
So it's not completely not useful, but it's important to keep them separate.
And I would stay away from the bags of mulch, like the cedar chips and stuff like that are either dyed, that you can get at the hardware store. If they have dyes in them, are good. And cedar, again, is another one that has a lot of terpenes, won't break down easily, won't promote growth. It will prevent decay. So that's why landscapers love it. They put it out there. It will never decay. It takes many years for it to decay.
Tannins?
Tannins.
That's why something's not right. Yes, tannins.
You said the softwood, so that younger mulch prevents carbon, or it ties up carbon.
It's so much carbon that you're putting into it that the all of the efforts of the soil and the biology within the soil is being put towards breaking down those wood chips in a way that becomes extractive to the plants. So we want to see the wood chips breaking down, and in most cases, we see if we are laying wood chips at the beginning of the season that are already aged at least a year, by the end of a season, they are almost completely consumed. Because of the biological activity that we are supporting below the soil.
And that's something to observe at your own place. If you put mulch down, record how long does it take to break down. Okay, that can be a great teller of how active your soil is. If it takes 2 years to break down something that looks like that, then you might have a problem. But if you are observing and it's breaking down relatively, you can gauge your soil, how healthy it is, how much is it working.
If you don't have a place to store the wood chips, would you get away with just essentially storing them in the paths?
We do.
Aged that way?
No, I would not recommend that. You think in the 12-inch bed?
Not in 12-inch bed on the paths though.
Oh, on bigger pathways?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was thinking the aisles. I was like, don't do that. Yes, in the bigger aisles.
Bigger.
It could be done that way. Yeah.
And let it spread out.
Yeah.
So is that from your own visual? I mean, your own experience that you don't use the fresh chips on crops? Is that something? Yeah.
Well, I mean, we definitely have personal experience with it, and you can certainly find it in writing. We did not find it in writing before we had the personal experience with it. So we were just so excited that we had wood chips that we just started spreading them everywhere.
I mean, now people are kind of talking about it more, but working with microbes. He talks about mulching and how
Michael Phillips,
he talked about more specifically for orchards. the green, nothing's broken down about this, so it takes a lot of effort for the organisms to get in there, inoculate it, start the process. Whereas, we give it some time, it will start doing itself, and then we add it. If you got time, you can do that. Also, the size of the wood chips. If it's really nice and shredded, it will be easier for fungus and bacteria to get in there and start breaking down. Bigger wood chips, you got to gauge it. If it's really big, it's going to take a lot more time for things to work its way into it.
So a lot of times when we have the bigger wood chips, we will incorporate that with leaves to be able to invite more of a habitat for that fungal growth. Speaking of leaves, we have so we utilize leaves. We do have a leaf drop at our farm. Leaves we want to be careful with, though, so we don't want to get leaves from anyone and everyone. We want to make sure that they're free of pesticides and garbage. And so the leaves that we utilize, we tend to incorporate more with our wood chips. And typically when we do that, it's a 1-to-1 ratio of wood chips to leaves. But again, we're also working with free material. So it depends on what we have. On a given year, when this photograph was taken, we definitely had more leaves on hand and less wood chips. This is straight leaves. And this is, there's an interior crop here of, these are beet greens in here. And then on the exterior of this row, this bed, and then the aisle, we put leaves in there. So that enabled us to be able to, we didn't have to remove the leaves when we went to plant in this bed after the peas were done. We just planted as a transplant right into it.
When you collect leaves, how do you store them?
In a big pile, just yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That'd be good. We should have a photograph of all of our piles.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. And we are moving the leaves with our tractor as well.
Mm-hmm. At what point do you combine the chips and the leaves?
When we're going to do the application.
So, we'll get to a photo actually.
So this is another example.
Another example of a path with leaves.
Right. Yeah. The leaves, obviously they're much lighter material, so they get consumed a lot quicker. And as much as possible, we tend to do that combination. So if we're working in a given area, we'll bring a bucket of wood chips over and a bucket of leaves over and mix them up there.
Do you have to age the leaves too, or no?
Doesn't hurt. Aged leaves, it just starts the breaking down process early. If you have fresh leaves, they're going to last a little bit longer on there. If they're a year old, you might already start seeing some worm castings in there, which is great. We'll add that, but it depends on, and again, this goes back to what you want to do with your mulch and cover crop. Do you want it to be there for a few months, or do you want to add it as sort of an amendment that adds a little bit of protection, but then will disappear quicker?
We do have to be careful of the if there are leaves that aren't shredded. Mm-hmm. Is that what it's called? They tend to clump a lot, so that's something to be careful of. So we try to find why do they clump more?
Why is the clumping bad?
Because clumping will be good if you're just having a mat and you want to, but if you're trying to then come in with transplants and you start moving it around, you'll be moving whole swaths of leaves around rather than just planting right through them. Yeah.
Question back.
Just out of curiosity, what do you put in when the peas go?
It depends on the year. There's not an automatic crop that goes into peas. I think.
Because you have all that trellis.
We move the trellising.
We move the trellises. Yeah, they're movable.
So typically, what happens actually is the peas are finishing out. It's sometimes a little bit stressful, but the peas are usually finishing out right when we really need them for the tomatoes. So we just pick them up and move them to that location. Yeah. They're not. The only bracing for this trellising is just the spikes at the end of the galvanized steel. So we just walk with them, put them down to the earth. We have incredible wind that moves through our farm, outrageous wind, and we've only once had one get bent.
One bend, yeah.
from the weight of beans, actually, and wind.
Yeah.
So we move them around, and then they're tied at the top, and we fold them and put them away for next year. They're galvanized steel, so we can leave them outside.
The next photo I think shows the wood chips and the leaves. This
So
is our
combination.
this is our garlic planting that we did this year. So Pete with a tractor, while three of us had tubs, he'd bring a scoop of leaves, put it on a tarp, go back, get a scoop of wood chips, put on the tarp. Leaves, wood, back and forth. And as we were filling our buckets, they got incorporated together. So we were mixing as we were filling buckets. And we probably went through 10, 15 yards of leaves and wood chips just to cover this whole section here.
Which was 14 beds?
I think it's 14 beds this year.
14 beds,
Yeah.
Question in the middle, I said. Go ahead.
How are you chopping your leaves?
They come to us chopped.
They come to, yeah.
And if they don't,
Yeah.
then we got
I'd like,
whole leaves.
yeah, I mean, we aspire, it'd be good for us to actually get,
Yeah.
it's not a wood chipper, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting what it's called. A leaf shredder. Shredded leaves. So yeah, that would be helpful for us. We don't have that yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah.
This was about, I want to say, a couple inches thick. I mean, the wood chips and the leaves work together really nicely, so the wood chips prevent any whole leaves, which you do see some whole leaves in here, from clumping together.
Yeah.
And it acts really nicely that way.
Great. So the final example that we have is using plant material. And so this photo was actually just taken like a couple weeks ago of what's happening out in the field at the moment. When you say it looks more beautiful, this is kind of like the moment where I feel like, oh, it's kind of messy looking, but it's pretty incredible. There's up close. There's this area right here was Napa cabbage and purple cabbage, and we had up close in this image. You can see all sorts of hypha happening. There's an incredible amount of biological activity that is existing here. We are keeping these plants there, and what we find is that we do an incredible amount of season extension, so we are harvesting out in our fields into December. Actually, there's crops. We just harvested some carrots out from the field last week, and because of that, we can't necessarily put a cover crop in to be seeded in for the next year. So for us, it's actually really helpful to just keep this organic matter as a cover in over the soil. The roots are in place, as Matt said before. We are almost always keeping the roots in place unless it's a root crop that we're harvesting. And then this organic matter itself, come spring, we'll have to do a light rake. It ends up being like 75 to 90% consumed come spring.
And you also can imagine there's roots in the ground holding the soil right now. So they're still intact right now.
Oh, yes?
Tomato vines for purpose of not, when you rotate crops.
Yeah.
We lock them out, leave the roots in the ground, and then basically we put them in a separate, at the end of the season, we put them in a separate compost pile, just because it takes a longer for the vines to break down.
So we only have a few more minutes, but the lasagna mulching application is kind of a culmination of a number of different methods, so we're just going to go through one example of that.
So over here you can see that about 3 years ago, 2017, this is what the soil looked like.
It was a new area.
Brand new.
Yeah.
Till it had gone through one winter. We love wine, so we started planting grapes. So we planted the grape vines here. This was taken a few weeks ago. As you can see, the soil has changed a lot. It's a lot darker. And as you can see, we have an interplanting of grapevines and parsley. So for the next slide, when we did this, what we applied to the grapevines was our normal compost complement per bed, 6 5-gallon buckets of compost per 50-foot bed. We laid that down. We added 2-year-old wood chips right to that. It was a sunny day when we did this, so we put the 2-year-old wood chips down on top of the compost, and at the same exact time, we had some newer wood chips to go right on top of it to keep the moisture in. We didn't want to put a bunch of 2-year-old wood chips down in the sun because they're not used to the sun. They're going to get fried. So we put some 2-year-old wood chips down, put a layer of fresh wood chips right on top of it, and that would retain the moisture and allow those fresh wood chips to get inoculated. So as you see, we dug this out a few weeks ago, and this is all of the fungus that had grown over the year. And it had already started eating through most of the wood chips. So after that, in the season, we wanted to use that bed space underneath the grapes. We put parsley in there. Parsley grew all season long. It was beautiful. We harvested it many times. The parsley then acted as a cover crop on top of the mulch, keeping moisture in, roots in the ground, and keeping all that wood chip nice and covered. So we're going to keep monitoring this as we go forward and seeing the development of the grapes and the soil there.
So just a few final takeaways. Is thinking about when, and this is something that we're always asking ourselves when using any of these systems, we're constantly asking ourselves, how old is the mulch? How fast are your mulches breaking down? So Matt touched upon that. It's a real testament to the amount of biological activity and organic matter you have in your soil to see how fast the mulches are breaking down, and try it out in small spaces. Don't do it to your whole farm if you don't know how quickly it's going to break down. Think about when do cover crops finish or go dormant. So working off of those times, the seeding schedule that we offered, thinking about making sure that you can explore a little bit, but we have learned all through the hard way that those timing work really well. We want to think about how much space does the cover crop need, and then what is that cash crop that is going in next, and that will dictate the decision of which type of cover crop or mulch to be using in a given area. Does anyone have any other questions? Time for a few questions. Yeah.
Are there specific crops you wouldn't use the leaf and wood chip mulch for any reason, or do you use it on everything?
It really, like what these questions are asking, everything can be used in some way. You just have to figure out, if you're putting lettuce in, we planted lettuce right in through some old wood chips, ended up working nicely. We've been playing around with scraping the wood chips off and doing direct seeding with a 6-row seeder with carrots right into a bed that had wood chips on it.
But we always do rake some of them off.
Rake some off.
So anything that's direct seeded is something.
You just want to figure out how you're going to use it together. Are you going to you're going to have to rake it off afterwards to do the next thing.
Right here.
I had 2 questions,
Yeah.
please. One, you mentioned cycle and season. Are you using that term interchangeably with growing cycles versus seasons?
Good. That's a great question. Not using them interchangeably necessarily. So if there is a bed that we're doing shorter season crops in, and we're getting 4 different crops in a given bed space, by the spring of the next year, we would technically be able to introduce a crop from the same family again.
The other question had to do with who's the dedicated record keeper?
Well,
you're doing somebody.
Matt and Pete.
A physical record or like a because
the mental record, Matt and I are always trying to get more things into writing and contextualize. Yeah. But Pete, who I co-founded the farm with, is the one that has really been able to maintain these dates. And then collectively we create a master plan for the season based on our wisdom and experience. Yeah.
Do you reapply any amendments or compost in between your successions?
every planting.
And so how would can you talk about an example of how you would incorporate it? Is it just right on top of your?
It's always on top, right? So we
yeah.
do a layering so that we're incorporating it on top.
So if we were doing the lettuce planting, we'd harvest it out. It was all harvested out. We twisted all the heads out. Depending on how old the bed is and what shape it looks like, we might go through the U-bar, do that first, then go through and apply compost. So generally about 6 to 7 buckets, 5-gallon buckets of compost per bed. We rake that out so it reaches all the way to the bed. We have some amendments we apply, so we do crab shell, alfalfa meal. We apply those on the bed.
Depending on the crop.
And then we end up having a tilter, that little Johnny's tilter with the drill, run over the surface just to incorporate into the top 2 inches of the soil.
Or use an iron rake.
Or an iron rake. You can use. That's how we did it up until we got the tilter.
If you had the wood chips, would you still be tilting?
Wood chip, it depends on it. So the wood chips, how much there was. We might rake some off. Sometimes it's so deteriorated that we just incorporate them. We can incorporate it relatively easily with a tilter.
And does it include any animal manure?
No, most of our compost is.
We don't at this point. We don't make enough of our own compost, so we buy in locally, and it is a combination of animal manure. Yeah.
Since you're adding so much carbon with all this mulch, do you have to increase your amended nitrogen?
That's the thing that's been really interesting because we're waiting that minimum of year. Or since we started doing that, we don't have to adjust those ratios at all. But prior to that, it was a significant shift. Yeah.
I mean, and that's something you have to observe for yourself, because if you do start doing it too quickly, you could throw off a balance in your own personal soil.
Yeah. A couple more questions. Yeah. Go ahead.
When you use alfalfa, how do you terminate it?
The living crop of alfalfa. Go ahead.
So we ended up actually cutting it down once, and we had a couple flushes out of it. So we found that interesting. We liked that, and we used it as a green mulch or manure. And then we ended up really having to get in there with a shovel. We had let it grow a nice big taproot, and really had to start kind of forking it out.
Yeah. Is there another? Go ahead.
I was wondering if you tried rotating the cover crops mulch in like a bed rotations. In and of themselves.
We do that, yeah. So if any example that we gave, so if there was rye in that area before, we wouldn't do. We wouldn't do that next.
And then do you have kind of a master plan to match those with the cash crops? Or
Yeah. At this point, some of as we were saying before, this is like in the last 3 to 5 years that we've really started to seriously dedicate time and space to this. So we are keeping those rotations in consideration and adding new cover crops and mulches to it each year. So next year we'll be able to speak to something else that we worked on. It's a constant experimentation. But yeah, I think it is important to consider all of that. Great. All right, we're a few minutes over, so thank you everyone for staying. Thank you.
Dogs.
Yeah, thank you. So good to see you. Yeah, thank you.